Hello, really good to see everyone again. I'm Hi. You're listening to Grey Verdict Files. There is one small detail in this case that sounds almost too ordinary to matter. 2 rice sacks. That's it. Not a bloody knife. Not a fingerprint on a window. Not a clear face on camera. Just 2 rice sacks tied to a body that someone had tried to sink into the sea. And if those sacks had stayed underwater, if the tide had moved just a little differently, if one retired man had not cast his fishing line in that exact spot, this woman may have remained nameless for a very long time. But the sea did something strange. It gave her back. And from those 2 sacks of rice, investigators would eventually be led to a quiet house in North Auckland, a family of Chinese immigrants, a hidden religious group, a room full of handwritten diaries, secret recordings, a suitcase in a garage, and a question that becomes harder to answer the deeper we go: how does a 70-year-old woman travel across the world looking for guidance, and end up wrapped in plastic, tape, stones, and silence? There are places where a crime feels impossible, not because bad things cannot happen there, but because the scenery almost tricks your mind into refusing it. Gulf Harbor, north of Auckland, is one of those places. Calm water. Expensive-looking houses along the coast. A golf course nearby. A yacht club. Boats sitting in the marina. People walking dogs. Retirees fishing. The kind of place where a photo taken on an ordinary morning can look like a tourism postcard. And that is exactly why the first discovery feels so wrong. On March 12, 2024, a retired man named Bao was fishing near the water when he noticed something black drifting on the surface. From a distance, it did not look like a person. It looked like rubbish. Maybe neat waste. Maybe something someone had dumped. A black plastic bag being pushed closer and closer by the sea. His fishing hook caught it. Think about that for a second. Not a police search. Not a missing person report. Not a witness running into a station. A fishing hook. Bao dragged the bag toward shore. It was heavy. Strange. Wrapped in layers. And because curiosity is a very human thing, he started pulling at the plastic. 1 layer. Then another. Then another. And then a hand appeared. That is the kind of detail where the whole file freezes. Because in that moment, this was no longer garbage. It was no longer something the sea had randomly carried in. It was a person. A woman. Wrapped in black plastic, bound with tape, and attached to weight. Police arrived. The body was taken to the mortuary at Auckland City Hospital. And when the forensic team opened the package, the first thing they understood was not who she was, but what someone had tried to do to her after death. There were 5 layers of plastic bag. Black tape wrapped tightly around the body. 2 rice sacks filled with stones tied to her. Whoever did this did not just want to hide the body. They wanted it to stay down there. Out of sight. Out of reach. Out of the story. But that plan had failed. The victim was female, believed to be around 60 to 70 years old. She was small, about 1.6 meters tall. Her recorded weight was only 25.6 kilograms, but that number was affected by decomposition in time in the water, so investigators could not say exactly what she weighed in life. Her body had been folded at the waist into a curled, almost fetal position, then fixed that way with tape. There were injuries. Bruising on the left forehead, the right cheek, the wrists, and the forearms. These were not all damage from the sea. Some of them had happened while she was still alive. But here is the first problem. The body had been in the water long enough for decomposition to destroy many key clues. The forensic pathologist could not give a clear cause of death. Could not give a clear time of death. Could not identify her by face. Could not get usable fingerprints. There was no ID. No missing person report that immediately matched. No quick database hit. So police had a dead woman, wrapped like someone had carefully prepared her to disappear forever, but no name, no timeline, no killer, and no exact cause of death. This is where many cases become cold. Because without identity, everything slows down. You cannot understand a victim's last days if you do not know who she is. You cannot ask her family questions. You cannot check her phone records. You cannot map her movements. You cannot find who saw her last. But police still had something. 2 rice sacks. And this is where the case quietly changes direction. The rice brand was Sun Rice, a common supermarket product in New Zealand. Nothing rare. Nothing suspicious by itself. A lot of households could have those sacks. But one detail mattered. The sacks had serial numbers. That sounds boring, right? But in a supply chain, a serial number is almost like a little passport. It can tell you when a product was packaged, which production line it came from, where it was distributed, and sometimes which store it ended up in. A murderer may look at a rice sack and see a disposable container. An investigator looks at the same sack and sees a route. So police followed it. The rice sacks led them to a pack-and-save supermarket in Albany, on Auckland's North Shore. Store records showed that, several weeks before the body was found, someone had bought more than 15 sacks of the same rice. Each sack was 10 kilograms. Pause here. One household buying rice is normal. Even buying a lot of rice can be normal, especially for a large family. But more than 150 kilograms? That is a question. Not proof of murder. Not by itself. But a question. The bank card used for that purchase belonged to a man named Lu Kai-shao. He had moved to New Zealand in 2017. And the same card was also used to buy fuel near the supermarket. At the gas station, CCTV captured his vehicle, a white Mercedes van. Now the rice sacks were no longer just rice sacks. Because a white van like that had also appeared in surveillance footage near Gulf Harbor Marina. The footage was from the night of March 8, 2024, 4 days before Bao's fishing hook dragged the body back from the water. The van arrived near the marina. 5 people got out. They moved between the vehicle and a bridge area near the water. The whole thing lasted around 20 minutes. The camera was too far away to clearly show faces. But it captured something that makes the footage feel even stranger. There were children with them. And someone had a stroller. A stroller near a marina at night is already unusual. But the prosecution would later argue something more disturbing, that the stroller was not being used to carry a child. It was being used to move the wrapped body in the stones. Now look at how fast the case has shifted. A woman in the sea. 2 rice sacks. A supermarket. A bank card. A white van. A marina camera. People moving in the dark. Children nearby. A stroller. Still, police did not rush in immediately. Because this was not enough yet. It pointed toward a household, yes. But a murder case, especially one with no clear cause of death, cannot be built on one strange shopping trip and distant footage. Investigators needed the hidden structure behind these details. And that structure was waiting inside a 5-bedroom house in Orwa. But before police could fully see it, one more clue had to surface. Not from the body. Not from the sea. From inside the house itself. There is something unsettling about a home that looks ordinary from the outside but operates by rules no outsider can see. A detached 5-bedroom house on Harvest Avenue in Orwa does not sound like the center of anything dark. It sounds like a family home. Bedrooms. Garage. Kitchen. Children's things. Daily life. But when investigators eventually searched Lu Kai-shao's residence, they found 13 people living there. 13. Lu Kai-shao's wife, Xiao Lanyue. Their 4 young children. Lu's parents, Li Shouyun and Lu Jingui, and 5 adult women from China. Those 5 women were not relatives. They were not tenants in the normal sense. They had come to New Zealand on tourist visas and overstayed. They were living in the home, but their role was not simple. Not guests. Not renters. Not quite family. And police noticed something else. The living conditions did not look good. The women appeared very thin. Hygiene was concerning. 3 women shared one bedroom. 2 slept on folding beds in the living room. There was a small storage area with recording equipment. In the garage, there was a large suitcase. Items that may seem random at first, until the trial begins and each one finds its place. But the search came later. First, police had to get close enough to the family. For more than 3 months after the body was discovered, investigators continued collecting evidence quietly. They traced purchases, looked at bank accounts, checked vehicle movements. They also found that Lu's wife, Xiao Lanyue, had bought 50 bags of landscaping stones from a local hardware store. The stones matched the stones found inside the rice sacks tied to the body. Rice from one purchase. Stones from another. A van at the marina. A body in the sea. Piece by piece, the direction became harder to ignore. Then came June 30th. Lu Kaishao, Xiao Lanyue, and their youngest child appeared at Auckland International Airport. They were preparing to fly to China. Customs alerted police. The couple was stopped. The arrests followed. Now investigators could enter the house. And the house opened up a much larger question than anyone expected. Because among the 5 women still living there, one of them eventually said something brief. Something easy to miss. A Chinese-speaking detective later testified about it. One woman mentioned that when she came to New Zealand, she had traveled with another woman. That other woman was the oldest among them. But that woman was no longer there. Hold on. That means the house did not always have 13 people. It had 14. And the missing person was the oldest woman. That small statement did what the rice sacks had done earlier. It gave investigators a thread. They checked immigration records. They looked for a Chinese woman who matched the age, the travel pattern, and the disappearance. The name that emerged was Wang Shulai. She was 70 years old. From Hainan, China. She arrived in New Zealand in August 2023. Investigators later traveled to China and contacted her family. Her identity was finally confirmed. The unnamed woman from the sea was Wang Shulai. She had been in New Zealand for only about 8 months. And now one of the strangest questions in the entire file becomes unavoidable. Why had nobody reported her missing? The answer is uncomfortable, but important. Wang had no close family in New Zealand. No independent social circle. No strong local ties. She had come to New Zealand for what was described as religious guidance from Lu Kaishao. If she disappeared from that house, who outside that circle would immediately notice? Who would call police? Who would say, "Where is she?" That is one of the scariest forms of vulnerability in a case like this. Not being alone in a house full of people. Being isolated from everyone outside it. And once police understood that Wang Shulai had lived in that house, the case was no longer just about a body dumped at sea. It became about what was happening inside that home before she died. Because this was not only a family. It was something else. To understand why Wang Shulai entered that house, we have to look at Lu Kaishao, but not from the beginning like a biography. That would be too easy. The important question is not where he was born or what he studied. The important question is this: why would several adult women leave China, travel to New Zealand, overstay visas, live under the roof of one family, accept a strict internal system, and call a man lord and master? That is where the group called the Ark appears. Lu was not an ordained pastor from a mainstream church. He was not the official leader of a public congregation. But he did lead a religious group. The Chinese name was connected to the idea of an Arkansas, and inside that house, the word family seemed to mean something very different from what outsiders would assume. On the surface, Lu used Christian language. His YouTube channel, launched around 2023, featured Chinese language worship songs. The themes were salvation, God, Jesus, redemption. In one video called True Salvation, Lu wore a suit and walked along the Orwa coastline while singing. Other videos used crosses, space imagery, nature scenes, and worship-style visuals. Words like Heavenly Father, redemption, and glory to God appeared in the lyrics. If you only saw that side, maybe it looked like religious music. Maybe unusual, maybe theatrical, but not necessarily criminal. But police later found handwritten diaries and manuscripts inside the home. And those writings painted something far more strange. Some notes described the Lu family as descendants of King David, one of the greatest kings of Israel in the Bible. The family was praised as not ordinary, but sacred. Chosen. Royal. A bloodline with divine meaning. The women in the group called Lu Lord and Master. His wife, Xiaolanue, was called Queen. Read that again slowly. A Chinese immigrant family in suburban New Zealand. A private home. Adult women living inside. A religious language built around God and salvation. And a household hierarchy where one man is Lord, his wife is Queen, and other members serve under them. It sounds absurd at first. Almost too strange. But the danger in cases like this is that strange does not mean fake. Sometimes strange is exactly how control hides itself, because outsiders do not know what they are looking at until it has already gone too far. The prosecution said the 5 women, and Wang Shulai, had come to New Zealand seeking Lu's religious guidance. But their role went far beyond study or worship. They were doing household labor. Caring for children. Serving the family. Living under rules. Their situation was described by prosecutors as practical servitude. Not legal slavery in the simple, movie-like sense. More like a system where people's daily actions, movement, behavior, and obedience were controlled so tightly that freedom became theoretical. And then the case gets even more uncomfortable. Police found writings by at least 3 women described as documents of bodily commitment or sacred bodily vows. In those writings, the women described loving Lu, forming a family with him, having children, and loving the other women too, all supposedly out of free will. That suggests something that was not just religious, and not just domestic. The household may have involved a polygamous structure. But again, we have to be careful. The existence of words like voluntary does not automatically prove real consent. In a closed system, especially one built around spiritual authority, the word voluntary can become complicated. A person can write "I choose this" while living in an environment where disobedience is punished, outsiders are distrusted, and the leader is treated as divinely chosen. This is why investigators paid such close attention to the diaries. Because the diaries did not just show belief. They showed management. Lu's mother, Li Shouyun, kept detailed records. She had reportedly practiced medicine in China for decades. In the house, police found medical items, including a surgical kit and stethoscopes. Li wrote almost every day, recording the performance of the women. Good behavior earned points. Bad behavior lost points. Punishments were noted. Obedience was measured. A family home had become a place where adult women could be scored like employees, students, or property. And among the women, Wang Shulai stood out. She was the oldest. She was the newest. She had arrived in August 2023. According to the prosecution, she occupied the lowest level of this internal order. Her tasks included picking vegetables, washing vegetables, turning soil, watering plants, and caring for children. Ordinary chores, if freely shared. Something else, if assigned under pressure and punishment. And Wang did not seem to fit. Her name began appearing repeatedly in notes. She was described as disobedient, unrepentant, not doing things properly. Her physical condition, kneeling posture, work performance, and emotional reactions were recorded and judged. This is where the case changes tone. Because until now, we can still say, maybe this was an unusual religious household. Maybe the women believed in it. Maybe there were internal rules, but that does not prove a killing. Then the notes begin describing Wang's deterioration. And the gap between religious guidance and control becomes harder to ignore. There is one thing that keeps coming back in this file: Wang Shulai was not treated like a person whose body was failing. She was treated like a person whose obedience was failing. That difference matters. Around February 29, records mentioned that Wang had been struck at the temple because of dereliction or failure in her duties. On March 3, a note under Lu Jinggui's name, titled something like "Analysis of Shulai's Situation," described swelling on Wang's face and said it could not be faked. But the same note still analyzed whether she was failing to kneel straight because she refused help, because she was physically weak, or because she was ill. Think about that. Her face was swollen. Her body may have been weak. Illness was considered. But the conversation still revolved around whether she was obeying correctly. This is what makes the diaries so chilling. Not because every word is dramatic. Quite the opposite. They are administrative, routine, calm. They look at suffering and turn it into a performance issue. Then March 6 arrives. Wang climbed over a fence and ran into a neighbor's yard. This is not a small detail. If Wang was simply living there freely, why would she climb a fence? Why not walk out the front door? Why not call someone? Why did this moment look like escape? She was brought back. And according to the records presented in court, a woman received points for bringing Wang back and controlling her. This detail is extremely important because it shows the internal scoring system was not abstract. It rewarded control over another person. Once returned, Wang was stripped of her outer clothing and locked in a tent for what was described as serious repentance. The notes mentioned that if she shouted, tape should be used to seal her mouth. If she defecated in her pants, a garbage bag could be used to cover her whole body. This is one of those places where you want to stop reading the file for a moment. Because the words are not just cruel. They are practical. They are instructions. They show people thinking through how to stop another human being from crying out, moving, or making a mess. And the prosecution later argued that the tent was not the end. Because after the escape, punishment escalated. Wang was moved into the large suitcase in the garage. The prosecution believed she likely suffocated inside that suitcase. Now, remember the forensic problem. The pathologist could not determine an exact cause of death. Decomposition had destroyed too much. The sea had taken too much. So the prosecution could not simply point to a medical report and say, this is exactly how she died. They had to build the case differently. They had to show a chain. Wang lived in the house. Wang was under control. Wang tried to escape. Wang was brought back. Punishment escalated. She was restrained. She was placed somewhere enclosed. Records later described no movement. Then the household discussed what to do with a body. Then the rice sacks, stones, van, marina, and sea enter the file. That is not one piece of evidence. That is a pattern. And the recordings made that pattern even harder to dismiss. One audio file from Lu's computer captured him telling people in the house what to do if Wang kept crying out. If she shouted, seal her mouth. If she continued after that, use a towel. If she still shouted, put her in the suitcase for further restraint and soundproofing. Other recordings included Liu Xiaolanyue and Liu's parents discussing how to tie Wang's hands in a figure-8 shape and whether the knots should be dead knots. This is where the defense would later try to push back. They would question translations, question certainty, question whether words had been misread, whether cultural or religious language had been interpreted too darkly, whether forensic uncertainty left reasonable doubt. But even before the verdict, the file gives us a very hard question. If this was care, why did it sound like restraint? If this was guidance, why were there instructions for tape, towels, knots, and a suitcase? If this was a family helping an elderly woman, why did she end up in the sea? And the answer, or at least the prosecution's answer, begins on March 8th. March 8th is one of the most important dates in this case. Not because one witness saw everything clearly. Not because a camera showed a face. Not because a medical report gave a clean conclusion. March 8th matters because Wang Shulai's presence and the records changed. The prosecution said this was likely the day the body was disposed of. A diary entry mentioned details about handling a body, needing 2 bags, maybe one would not be enough, 2 or 3 would work, letting the air out, finding something to cover it, placing it into the trunk. From this point, Wang's name disappeared from the scoring records. That is not dramatic on the surface. A name stops appearing. But in a house where everything was recorded, where behavior was scored, where Wang's supposed failures had been repeatedly written down, silence becomes evidence. Why did the woman everyone had been recording suddenly vanish from the system? Another note said 2 women received points for spending 3 hours cleaning the garage. Again, by itself, cleaning a garage is nothing. But place it beside the suitcase. Place it beside the recordings. Place it beside the notes about bags and trunk. Place it beside the disappearance of Wang's name. Place it beside the van seen at Gulf Harbor that night. Now the pieces begin pulling toward one conclusion. By the afternoon of March 8th, recordings captured people in the house discussing how to deal with the body. Options included burning it, burying it, abandoning it in the forest, or dumping it in the sea. The court heard that Liu's children may have been present during this discussion and may even have been asked to speak. This detail is difficult to process. Children in the background of a case like this are always painful, but here they are not just background. Remember the marina footage. Children were seen among the group near the van. Remember Liu's later online claims that child protection authorities took his children because they were beautiful and targeted by a Western system. Hold that thought. It will come back. According to the prosecution, Liu chose the sea. The body was wrapped in plastic. Tape was used. Rice sacks filled with landscaping stones were tied on as weights. The white Mercedes van went to Gulf Harbor Marina. 5 people got out. They moved between the vehicle and the water area for around 20 minutes. The camera was too far away to identify faces clearly. But the vehicle matched. The timing matched. The rice matched. The stones matched. The shopping matched. And the stroller, that stroller remained one of the most disturbing images in the prosecution's theory. Because a stroller is supposed to represent care. A child. A family outing. Something ordinary. But here, prosecutors said it may have carried a wrapped body and stones toward the water. That is the kind of object that changes meaning forever once you understand the context. The sea was meant to erase everything. The plastic would hide the body. The tape would hold it. The stones would sink it. The rice sacks would contain the weight. The dark water would make identification almost impossible. But something went wrong. Maybe the package did not sink properly. Maybe gases from decomposition changed buoyancy. Maybe the tide, the packaging, the weight, the timing all failed in one small way. Whatever happened, 4 days later, the body surfaced. And the sea carried Wang Shulai back to shore. Not gently. Not with answers. But with enough clues for police to begin. By this point, you might think Lu Kaixiao's public identity would match what police were finding. A private religious leader. A man at the center of a small group. Someone with followers who called him Lord. But this case has another layer. On Chinese social media, especially Douyin, Lu built a very different image. He presented himself as a father persecuted overseas. A Chinese man whose children had been taken by New Zealand child protection authorities. A musician. A patriot. Someone standing against Western power. Someone framed, robbed, targeted, and silenced. His profile included statements about creating original music since 2012 to protect world peace and defend a shared future for humanity. He claimed hegemonic forces had framed him, attacked him, stolen property and children. He called on Chinese compatriots to stand together. He framed silence as complicity with evil. If you saw only that page, you might think, here is a desperate father begging for help. And that is exactly why this case becomes complicated in the public mind. On November 22, 2025, Lu began posting videos claiming that on September 6, 2024, his 4 children had suddenly been taken by Orana Tamariki, New Zealand's child protection agency. He said the court-stated reason involved psychological harm at home, but he argued the real reason was something else, that his children were beautiful and cute, and therefore targeted by the Western system. He spoke emotionally. He counted the days. He described the youngest child as still breastfeeding, only 18 months old, taken while sleeping. He said more than a year had passed. He said he counted every day. Then he expanded the story. He connected his personal case to New Zealand police scandals, child protection scandals, overseas Chinese oppression, Western hegemony, even Epstein's Island. He referenced a real New Zealand police scandal involving a former high-ranking officer and serious misconduct. That scandal itself existed in public reporting. But the issue is the connection. There was no direct management link shown between that scandal and the removal of Lu's children. This is a familiar rhetorical move. Take a real, verifiable scandal. Place it beside your own story. Let the audience make the emotional connection. You do not always need to prove the bridge if the viewer builds it themselves. Lu would ask what they had taken such beautiful children for. He would point back to the scandal. He would call people to shout patriotic slogans. Long live the People's Republic of China. Long live the unity of the people of the world. And the online effect was powerful. He showed documents and clips, though often redacted, partial, or lacking full context. He showed Chinese passports for the children, emphasizing their Chinese nationality rather than New Zealand nationality. That detail shifted the audience's perception. This no longer looked like a local child welfare issue. It looked, to many followers, like foreign authorities taking Chinese children. By January 2026, he began posting videos of donations to severely ill children in China, showing transfer records and presenting himself not only as a father fighting for his own children, but as a man helping other children too. Within a short time, he gained more than 500,000 followers. Now, there is a strange split. On Douyin, he looked like a persecuted Chinese father, a patriotic musician, a defender of children, a victim of Western institutions. On YouTube and inside the New Zealand case file, he looked like the leader of a private religious group where followers called him Lord, women lived under household rules, and a 70-year-old woman died after alleged restraint and punishment. These two images do not sit together easily. And there is another oddity. On Douyin, there was little visible trace of the YouTube worship songs about Christ, salvation, and eternal life. No obvious public emphasis on King David's descendants. No mystical Lu bloodline. Meanwhile, on overseas platforms, investigators and journalists could not easily find the same child protection campaign he pushed to Chinese audiences. Even his original YouTube account had disappeared. So the question becomes, who was Lu speaking to, and why? If his main goal was to pressure New Zealand authorities, Why was the campaign so focused on Chinese social media? Why not first target New Zealand media, local community groups, or local Chinese language outlets? Some commenters claiming New Zealand IP addresses said Lu blocked local critics and that the Chinese community in New Zealand had already heard negative rumors about his religious group. Those are online claims, and they have to be treated carefully. But they show a split between two audiences, the followers far away who saw a persecuted father, and the local context where his household may already have raised concern. And when the case went to court, the child protection story gained a very different interpretation. Because if we place the timeline back into the file, the children were living in a home where several unrelated adult women were allegedly in practical servitude, where their father may have been in a polygamous structure, where grandparents faced charges connected to a body disposal case, where children appeared in marina footage the night prosecutors said a body was dumped, and where children may have been present during discussions about how to handle a corpse. Against that background, child protection intervention no longer looks random. It looks like the authorities may have had serious reasons to act. But Lu's public narrative had already prepared an answer for everything. If New Zealand authorities accused him, it was persecution. If police investigated him, it was a Western conspiracy. If children were removed, it was because they were beautiful in Chinese. If followers doubted him, they were betraying righteousness. And that brings us to one of the most important questions in this case: was the arc built around faith, or around control? There is another piece of Lu's past that seems random at first, until money enters the file. Back in 2011, the Christchurch earthquake killed 185 people. That same year, on the Chinese talent show China's Got Talent, a 23-year-old man appeared with a dramatic story. He said his fiancée had died in the earthquake. He sang a song called Moonlight Wedding while blindfolded, presenting it as a tribute to her memory. The judges were not persuaded, and he was eliminated. That young man was Lu Kaishao. He did not give up music. Years later, New Zealand media found that he had uploaded music to YouTube and to his own website, connected to KL Music in a name resembling Universe Quarrel. Some of his music reached hundreds of thousands of views. Media reporting suggested that this website may have been one channel through which he recruited followers and collected money. And this is where the religious story starts looking less purely spiritual. Police found gold bars in a shoebox at Lu's residence, worth around 2 million New Zealand dollars, roughly 8.6 million yuan. They also found multiple bank accounts with large unexplained deposits. One woman from China had transferred 1.2 million New Zealand dollars to Lu, around 5.16 million yuan. A detective in the case said in court that one could say the group was not really about religious enlightenment at all, but about extracting money. Now, that is the prosecution's framing. The defense would not accept it. But from a storytelling perspective, this is a major turn. Because Wan Shulai's arrival no longer sits inside a simple elderly believer seeking guidance frame. She may have entered a system that blended religion, personal loyalty, domestic labor, possible polygamy, money, and isolation. And if her family connected to Lu through his online music or website, the internet becomes not just background. It becomes the doorway. A song leads to belief. Belief leads to trust. Trust leads to travel. Travel leads to a house in a foreign country. The house leads to rules. Rules lead to punishment. Punishment leads to an attempted escape. And then the sea. That chain is not just tragic. It is modern. Because this is not an old village rumor or a hidden sect in the mountains. This is online charisma, transnational followers, digital identity, religious performance, and a private home in New Zealand. The public image was music. The inner records were discipline. The public message was love, peace, salvation, and world unity. The court evidence included tape, towels, knots, a suitcase, bags, stones, and a body. That gap is the heart of the case. On May 25, 2026, the case opened in the High Court at Auckland. Four people sat in the dock: 38-year-old Lu Kaishao, his wife Xiao Lanue, his 63-year-old mother Li Xiaoyun, and his 65-year-old father Lu Jinggui. All denied the charges. They chose to represent themselves. The court appointed standby lawyers and provided Mandarin interpreters. The core charges were kidnapping and manslaughter. In New Zealand law, the kidnapping issue centered on whether Wang was unlawfully deprived of freedom and prevented from leaving as she wished. Manslaughter required proving that the defendant's actions were legally connected to her death. So the prosecution had to prove two big things. Was Wang Shulai unlawfully confined? And did what happened inside that household cause her death? That second question was difficult. Very difficult. Because, again, the forensic pathologist could not determine an exact cause of death. Wang's body had been in seawater for days. Decomposition had damaged evidence. There were injuries formed while she was alive, including marks on the wrists and forearms that could relate to restraint. But whether those injuries alone caused death could not be concluded. For the defense, that uncertainty was valuable. If no one can say exactly how she died, how can you prove who caused it? That is the kind of question a jury has to take seriously. So the prosecution did not rely on one medical conclusion. They built a chain from many different sources: diaries, handwritten notes, recordings from Lu's computer, bank records, physical evidence, vehicle movements, marina CCTV, and secret recordings made by listening devices police installed in July and August 2024. A large amount of this evidence was in Chinese. That created disputes over translation, meaning, tone, and context. And those disputes became one of the defense's main strategies. Lu questioned police, forensic experts, translators, and investigators himself. When a forensic scientist tested a suspicious foam board from the house and the result was inconclusive for blood, Lu pressed the point. An uncertain test could not be treated as definite blood evidence, correct? Questions like that helped him frame the case as full of uncertainty. He also challenged translation choices. In court, a police translator named Cyril Yang had translated part of a Chinese manuscript in a way that carried slave-like meaning. Lu questioned which Chinese character created that meaning. The translator pointed to a character he understood as slave, but Lu argued the character was not slave, but Confucian or scholarly, depending on the written form and context. This may sound like a small language fight. It is not. Because the Chinese handwritten records were central to how the prosecution explained the ark's internal order. If words were translated too harshly, the jury might see servitude where there was only spiritual language. If words were translated too softly, the jury might miss coercion hidden behind polite terms. Translation became a battle for the meaning of the entire household. Was this a family and religious community with strange but voluntary practices? Or was it a closed system of control, punishment, and exploitation? The prosecution's position was clear. Wang came to New Zealand seeking guidance, but entered a household where she labored, was scored, disciplined, punished, and prevented from leaving. When she tried to escape, control escalated. She was confined in a tent, then allegedly placed in the suitcase, where she likely died. Instead of calling emergency services or police, the family discussed disposal options and dumped her body at sea. When the body was found, Lu and Xiao allegedly tried to create a false version involving heart disease, a travel death, and a burial at sea wish. The defense's version was very different. Wang was already in poor health. She had behaved dangerously. Restrictions were used to prevent her from harming herself or others. The disposal of the body was a panicked, ignorant decision, not proof of causing death. Some Chinese records were misunderstood or over-translated. The pathologist could not establish cause of death. Physical evidence could not directly prove the exact fatal act. If you are a juror, that is the problem. You are not being asked whether the household was strange. Strange is not enough. You are not being asked whether the body disposal was horrifying. Horrifying is not enough for manslaughter. You are being asked whether the evidence proves, beyond reasonable doubt, that the defendants unlawfully confined Wang and that their actions caused her death. And with no clean cause of death, every diary entry, every recording, every purchase, every movement becomes important. The case becomes less like one smoking gun and more like a room slowly filling with smoke. Just when the file seems already full, another person enters the story from China, Wang Shulai's youngest son, Wu Chunhong. Wang had lived with her husband in Qianhai, Hainan. She had 3 sons. The older 2 had reportedly cut ties with their parents, and the youngest, Wu Chunhong, handled related matters. New Zealand police sought help from Chinese police to interview Wu. In August 2024, 2 New Zealand officers traveled to Hainan and observed Chinese police questioning him. But police had also installed listening devices in Lu's home. Those recordings captured Lu coaching Wu on how to answer investigators. And this is one of the most revealing parts of the case. Wu also called Lu Lord in their conversations. Prosecutors described Wu as Lu's 12th family member, and said similar families in China may have numbered at least 37. If true, the arc was not just one house in Orwa. It was a network. Lu gave Wu a complete external story. First, Wang's death was to be explained as heart disease. She had died of heart failure while traveling. Her wish had been to be buried at sea. Lu was simply helping fulfill that wish. Second, Wu was told how to handle police questions about religion. If asked, he should say he had not participated in any activity for a long time. Lu advised him not to passively answer question after question, but to ask back, control the rhythm, and not say I don't know or I'm not clear, because once he said that, things would be over. This was not casual advice. Lu coached tone, speed, facial expression, body language. If Wu wanted to stop speaking, he could say he felt unwell, place his hands on his knees, breathe deeply, and avoid saying he was cooperating with the investigation. Wu even asked whether he could slap the table and loudly question why police performed an autopsy on his mother without permission. Lu first said yes, then adjusted it, do not slap the table too loudly. Slap your thigh instead. Enough to express emotion. That detail is so specific it almost feels unreal. Not just what to say. How to sit. How to breathe. How to show anger. How loud the anger should be. Third, Lu shaped a public counterattack. Wu could claim that the New Zealand government had recovered and autopsied Wang's body, destroying her remains and her wishes, violating her dignity. He could say he was suing the New Zealand government for 30 million New Zealand dollars. This coaching formed the basis of obstruction-related charges against Lu and Xiao. And it also reveals how narrative worked in this case. Inside the house, according to prosecutors, the records showed control and punishment. Outside the house, Lu worked to build a story of persecution, dignity, rights, and Western wrongdoing. The body in the sea would be reframed as a completed wish. The autopsy would become desecration. The investigation would become oppression. The family would become victims. Here, the case is no longer just physical evidence. It becomes a battle over reality. Who gets to define Wang's death? Was it a crime scene? Or a burial? Was the autopsy an investigation? Or a violation? Was Lu a suspect? Or a persecuted spiritual father? Was Wang a victim? Or a believer whose final wish was misunderstood? And the reason these questions matter is because, in many high-control groups, the leader's power does not only come from rules. It comes from interpretation. The leader tells people what things mean. Pain becomes discipline. Escape becomes rebellion. Police become enemies. Contradiction becomes persecution. Evidence becomes a test of faith. So when investigators found recordings of Lu coaching Wu, they were not just hearing someone prepare a witness. They were hearing someone try to control the story after death. There is a line from the judge's later remarks that cuts straight through the whole case. He described the Liu family as great historians, in effect, because they documented so much themselves. Their own diaries and recordings became some of the strongest evidence against them. That is the strange irony here. They wrote. They recorded. They tracked. They scored. They analyzed. They preserved conversations. They created the paper and audio trail that prosecutors used to rebuild the final days of Wang Shulai. Without those records, the case would have been much harder. Remember, no clear cause of death. Body decomposed. Face damaged. Fingerprints unusable. CCTV unclear. No immediate missing person report. But the household kept its own shadow archive. Diaries about Wang's behavior. Notes about her swollen face. Records of her escape attempt. Points awarded for bringing her back. Instructions about tape, garbage bags, restraint, and repentance. Recordings about sealing her mouth, using a towel, placing her in a suitcase. Discussions about knots. Notes about body bags and the trunk. Garage cleaning. Disposal plans. Sea dumping. Later coaching of Wang's son. All of these together do something powerful. They turn the house into a witness. Not a perfect witness. Not a single witness. But a witness made of fragments. The defense tried to break those fragments apart. This word might be mistranslated. That test was inconclusive. This recording needs context. That action was panic. The body's cause of death is unknown. The stones prove disposal, not killing. The rice proves purchase, not murder. The camera is blurry. The stroller is not clear. The household was unusual, but unusual is not illegal. And in a courtroom, those arguments matter. They are not meaningless. Reasonable doubt can live inside gaps. But the prosecution's strength was the way the gaps were surrounded. One gap might be innocent. Many gaps pointing in the same direction become harder to explain. Why did Wang try to climb over a fence? Why was she brought back? Why was someone rewarded for controlling her? Why were there instructions about sealing her mouth? Why was the suitcase discussed as a way to restrain and soundproof her? Why did her name vanish from records after March 8th? Why were bags, trunk, and body disposal discussed? Why did the garage need 3 hours of cleaning? Why did Liu and Xiao buy rice and stones that matched the items used to sink her? Why did the van appear at the marina? Why was a false heart disease and burial version allegedly prepared? Why coach her son in such detail? Any one of these questions can be challenged. Together, they create pressure. And that is what a circumstantial case often does. It does not always hand you one scene where everything is visible. It asks you to look at the pattern and decide whether there is any reasonable innocent explanation left. The jury deliberated for about 11 hours over 3 days. Liu Kaixia was found guilty on all 5 charges: kidnapping, manslaughter, obstruction of justice, indignity to a human body, and refusing to provide police with device passwords. He faced a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Xiao Lanyue was found guilty of kidnapping, manslaughter, indignity to a human body, and obstruction of justice. Li Shouyun, Lu's mother, was found guilty of kidnapping, but the jury could not reach a verdict on the manslaughter charge. Lu Jingue, Lu's father, was found guilty only of indignity to a human body. The jury could not decide on kidnapping and manslaughter. Sentencing was scheduled for August. Now, if we stop here, the case becomes just a verdict. Guilty. Not guilty. Undecided. Sentencing later. End of story. But that would miss the thing that makes this file linger. Because the legal verdict answers some questions, but not all of them emotionally. It confirms that the jury accepted enough of the prosecution's chain against Liu and Xiao. It confirms that Wang Shulai was not just a woman who died naturally and was given a strange burial. It confirms the court saw unlawful confinement, a fatal chain of conduct, body indignity, and attempted obstruction. But it does not fully explain how a system like this grows in plain sight. How did followers come to see Lu as Lord? How did a suburban family home become a private kingdom? How did religious words become tools of obedience? How did a 70-year-old woman become so isolated that nobody outside the house immediately reported her missing? How did a man build one image online for Chinese followers and another spiritual world inside New Zealand? How did a house full of adults record so many details and still not seem to understand, or not care, what those records would one day reveal? And maybe the most haunting question, what would have happened if the rice sacks had not been traceable? Think about that. If the sea had not returned the body. If Bao's hook had not caught that plastic. If the serial numbers had been destroyed. If the store records did not exist. If the white van had not been captured. If one woman in the house had not said she once traveled with another older woman. Would Wang Shulai have had a name in this case? Or would she have stayed a nameless woman in a black plastic bag, briefly mentioned in the news, then slowly forgotten? That is why the rice sacks matter so much. Not because they are dramatic. Because they are ordinary. They remind us that in real investigations, the truth often does not arrive as a grand confession. It arrives through something small. A number on packaging. A purchase at a supermarket. A receipt. A fuel stop. A blurry van. A woman's accidental sentence. A missing name in a diary. The people who tried to sink Wang Shulai may have believed the ocean would erase her. But the ocean did not erase her. It carried her back with two ordinary sacks attached. And those sacks pulled the entire hidden world behind her into the light. In the end, this case is not only about a body found at Gulf Harbor. It is about isolation. It is about belief turned into control. It is about how public narratives can be built to cover private realities. It is about how a person can travel across the world looking for meaning, only to disappear inside someone else's system of obedience. And it is about one uncomfortable truth in criminal cases: sometimes the most powerful evidence is not the thing the killer fears. It is the thing they never thought mattered. A rice sack. A serial number. A small ordinary object. Enough to bring a woman's name back from the sea.